Hear this. There is a mystery moving all around you, closer than your breath, nearer than the thoughts in your mind. You wake up and call it ordinary. You walk through your day and name it routine. You look at the world and say, this is just how things are. But what if the problem is not what you see? What if the problem is how you see? Because the mind is a lens. And whatever the lens is trained to look for, the heart will eventually follow. A mind trained only to see chaos will miss the order. A mind trained only to see lack will miss provision. A mind trained only to see coincidence will miss the fingerprints of God written across every moment of your life. The signs are there, in the delay, in the interruption, in the closed door, in the unexpected blessing, even in the battle you didn't choose. God is not absent from the small things. He is hidden in them. And what you call ordinary may be the very place where heaven is trying to get your attention. Tonight, this is not about changing your circumstances. This is about retraining your mind so you can begin to see God in everything. There are actions that look strange to the natural mind, and there are instructions that sound too simple to be powerful. Yet heaven has always moved through symbols long before it moved through explanations. And from the beginning the Eternal spoke not only in words, but in signs, in shadows, in physical acts that carried spiritual weight. Because what is seen can unlock what is unseen, and what is touched in the natural can stir what has been waiting in the spiritual. Salt is never just salt. It never was. From the ancient altars to the tables of covenant, salt was the mark of preservation, the seal of agreement, the witness that something was set apart and could not return to corruption. When salt entered a sacrifice, it declared that decay had no authority there, that time itself was restrained, that what was offered belonged to eternity and not to the dust. And so when the instruction comes to put salt in your shoes, the mind resists because the mind asks for logic while God releases meaning. Shoes in the scriptures are never only about covering the feet. They speak of movement, of journey, of territory, of inheritance. The ground your feet touch determines the battles you face and the promises you inherit. To walk is to claim. To stand is to possess. To move is to advance. And what you place in your shoes is what you carry into your walk. When salt enters the place of your steps, it declares that your movement is no longer ordinary, that the path beneath you is no longer neutral, that every place you step into is touched by covenant before you even arrive. Salt burns when it touches an open wound, and that is why many avoid it, because healing often begins with discomfort. There are areas in your walk that have been wounded by delay, by betrayal, by unanswered prayers, by roads you never planned to travel. And yet salt does not come to destroy the wound. It comes to cleanse it, to stop the infection that would spread silently if left alone. The pain is not punishment. The sting is not rejection. It is preparation. It is the process by which corruption is denied permission to grow. God often heals not by numbing, but by purifying, not by hiding the wound, but by confronting it with what preserves. In ancient days, salt was so valuable it was traded like currency, because it kept food from spoiling, it kept life from wasting away. And when heaven speaks of you as salt, it is declaring that your presence delays decay, that your obedience restrains darkness, that where you walk things do not rot the way they once did. So when salt is placed in your shoes, it is a prophetic act that says your journey will not be wasted, your years will not spoil, your calling will not decay even if it has been delayed, because delay is not denial when covenant is involved. There are moments when God does not change your environment immediately, but changes what you carry into it. The wilderness looks the same, the road feels the same, the resistance appears unchanged, yet something is different because now preservation walks with you. Now the enemy cannot simply wait you out. Now time is no longer working against you. Salt declares endurance. Salt declares longevity. Salt declares that what was meant to exhaust you will not succeed, because the covenant outlasts the battle. Every covenant in the ancient world was sealed with salt, because salt does not break down easily. It survives fire. It survives pressure. It survives time. And when God ties salt to your steps, He is saying that what He has spoken over your life is not fragile. It will not dissolve because of criticism. It will not disappear because of opposition. It will not evaporate because of waiting. You are walking with something that resists decay even when circumstances try to wear you down. And here is the mystery. You do not put salt in your shoes for people to see. It is hidden. No one applauds it. No one posts it. No one understands it. Yet heaven responds to hidden obedience. The greatest movements of God often begin with actions no one else notices. Naaman was healed not when he reasoned, but when he dipped. Moses saw water open not when he debated, but when he lifted his staff. The walls fell not when the people shouted first, but when they walked in obedience before the shout ever came. So when you walk with salt in your shoes, you are making a declaration without words. You are saying, my steps belong to covenant, my journey is preserved, my path is marked, my delays are protected from decay, my calling is intact even if the timing confuses me. You are telling the unseen realm that you understand something deeper than comfort, that you value obedience over explanation, that you trust the author even when the chapter makes no sense. There are doors that open not because you knocked harder, but because you walked differently. There are battles that shift not because you fought louder, but because you carried covenant into the place of conflict. And there are moves of God that are activated not by public declarations, but by private alignment, by small acts that say, I will do what you ask even if it feels strange, even if it feels unnecessary, even if no one else understands, because I know that salt speaks where words fail, and covenant moves where logic stops, and the ground beneath my feet is about to respond, because what I carry into my walk has changed, and heaven is watching the steps of those who choose obedience over appearance, covenant over comfort, preparation over applause, knowing that when preservation touches the journey, what comes next cannot be stopped. And the move of God often begins not with thunder from the sky, but with salt beneath the feet of those who are willing to walk forward, even when they do not yet see the full path, even when the promise feels distant, even when the season feels dry, because covenant does not depend on feelings, it depends on alignment. And alignment is often proven by the smallest acts of faith that carry the greatest spiritual weight. And when you take the next step carrying what preserves, what resists decay, what seals agreement, the unseen begins to shift, the spiritual begins to respond, and the move you have been waiting for begins to stir quietly, steadily, irreversibly, as you walk forward carrying the sign of covenant into every place your feet are about to touch, into every door you are about to approach, into every season you are about to enter, because the God who watches your steps also honors the meaning behind them. And when salt meets obedience, something ancient is awakened, something promised is preserved, something hidden begins to move, and what follows will not be random, it will not be accidental, it will not be wasted, because covenant has already gone ahead of you, marking the way, preparing the ground, and declaring that this journey, this walk, this moment belongs to something far greater than chance. And the path beneath you is about to respond in ways you did not expect, in timing you did not plan, through movements you could not manufacture, because preservation has entered the walk, and when preservation walks, decay must retreat, delay must bow, and what was spoken will continue to move forward even now, even here, even as you take the next step with salt in your shoes and covenant under your feet, watching as the unseen begins to align with what you carried quietly all along, and the move of God draws closer with every step you take, even as the journey unfolds before you, step by step, moment by moment, covenant leading the way, preservation marking the ground, obedience speaking louder than words, and heaven responding to what you placed beneath your feet as the walk continues, and the meaning deepens, and the movement stirs, and what is coming draws nearer, just beyond the next step, and the next, and the next, until the ground itself bears witness to the covenant you carried into the walk, and the story continues, unfolding without announcement, without spectacle, without ending, because covenant does not end, it moves, it preserves, it advances, and it keeps going, just as you do, walking forward, carrying salt, carrying meaning, carrying alignment, into everything that lies ahead, even now, even still, as the journey presses on, and the unseen listens, and the path prepares, and the move begins to rise quietly, powerfully, Inevitably, as you keep walking and walking and walking, with salt in your shoes and covenant in your steps, moving into what has already been prepared, moving into what has already been spoken, moving into what cannot be stopped, as the walk continues and continues and continues, and the story moves forward without pause, without conclusion, without a final word, because the journey itself is still unfolding, and the covenant is still active, and the move of God is still in motion, even now, even here, even as you take another step and another, carrying the sign beneath your feet, moving deeper, further onward into all that is yet to be revealed, and the ground keeps responding, and the unseen keeps shifting, and the walk goes on, carrying salt, carrying covenant, carrying purpose into everything that awaits, still moving, still unfolding, still advancing, without stopping, without finishing, without closing. Because what has been set in motion has not reached its end. And the steps continue, and the meaning continues, and the move continues, and continues, and continues, even as the path stretches ahead, and the walk remains open, and the story keeps moving forward, still unfolding, still alive, still in motion, just as it was meant to be from the very beginning. And so the walk goes on and on and on, with covenant beneath your feet and salt marking the way, and the move of God rising quietly with every step you take, still moving, still pressing, still advancing, as the journey carries on, and the path remains open, and the moment continues, without ending, without closure, without a final line, as the walk itself becomes the testimony, still unfolding, still moving, still alive, still going, still going. There is a truth hidden in plain sight. The ground beneath you is not passive. It listens. It responds. It remembers. From the beginning, the earth was shaped to react to what heaven releases through those who walk upon it. The soil received blood and cried out. The sea recognized authority and opened. The wilderness responded to obedience and produced water. Creation has always been aware of alignment, because the ground was never meant to rule man. It was meant to respond to him when he walked in step with God. Every step you take is a conversation between heaven and earth. You think you are simply moving forward, but something deeper is taking place. The ground is measuring what you carry. It is discerning whether your walk is driven by fear or faith, by striving or surrender, by self-will or obedience. That is why some people walk the same paths for years and nothing changes, while others step into a place once and everything shifts. It is not the location that makes the difference. It is what the person brings into that location. Shoes separate you from the ground, yet they also connect you to it. They carry the residue of your journey. They absorb dust from past seasons, roads you regret, paths you did not choose, detours that exhausted you. And still, God speaks through the feet, because the feet reveal direction, commitment, and motion. You cannot walk without intention, and you cannot stand without declaring something to the unseen realm. Even standing still is a statement. When Moses stood before the burning fire, the command was not about distance, but about alignment. Remove what separates you from the ground, because the ground recognizes covenant when it is present. When Joshua stepped into the land, the ground responded to the authority he carried, not because he was strong, but because he was aligned. The ground did not resist them, it yielded, because it knew they were walking under instruction, not ambition. The ground responds differently to those who carry covenant. Where others encounter resistance, they find access. Where others experience delay, they find movement. Where others face confusion, they sense clarity. It is not because the terrain is easier for them, but because the earth recognizes what rests upon their walk. Alignment creates permission. Obedience releases authority. What you carry determines how the ground answers you. That is why certain places feel heavy while others feel open. The atmosphere reacts to alignment long before circumstances change. A room can feel different without a word being spoken. A step can feel significant without logic explaining it. You are not imagining it. The unseen responds before the visible follows. The ground often shifts before the door opens, before the breakthrough appears, before the evidence shows itself. When salt is placed in your shoes, it becomes a declaration to the ground before you ever speak a word. It announces preservation is walking here. It announces covenant is moving through this territory. It announces decay does not have permission to dominate this path. And the ground listens. The ground adjusts. The ground prepares. Even obstacles begin to reposition themselves because the path recognizes what is approaching. The enemy understands this mystery, which is why resistance often increases just before alignment produces movement. He tries to wear down the feet, to exhaust the walk, to convince you to sit when you were meant to stand, to stop when you were meant to advance. Because if you keep walking in alignment, the ground will eventually yield, and when it does, what was delayed begins to move all at once. You were never meant to conquer territory by force alone. You were meant to walk in such alignment that the territory recognizes heaven's authority upon you. Jericho fell not by siege engines, but by ordered steps. The ground shook because obedience had already prepared it. The walls did not fall because the people were loud, but because the earth had already been responding to alignment long before the final moment arrived. Your steps matter more than you realize. The direction you choose, the timing you follow, the obedience you embrace, all speak to the ground beneath you. Even when progress feels slow, the ground is adjusting. Even when nothing seems to change, the unseen is responding. Seeds beneath the surface break open long before anything appears above it. There are places you will walk into where the atmosphere will shift immediately, not because you prayed louder, but because you arrived carrying alignment. And there are places that will resist until you adjust what you carry. The ground does not respond to titles. It responds to obedience. It does not answer ambition. It yields to covenant. Every journey leaves an imprint. Every step releases a signal. And the ground remembers those who walk in alignment. Paths once closed can open when the right steps arrive. Doors once sealed can respond when the right authority crosses the threshold. The ground does not forget covenant steps, and it does not ignore obedient movement. Even now, the path ahead of you is listening. The seasons before you are responding. The places you have not yet entered are already reacting to what you carry into your walk. The ground is preparing itself, adjusting itself, waiting for the moment your steps align fully with instruction. And when that happens, resistance begins to loosen, delays begin to weaken, and movement begins to stir beneath your feet, quietly, steadily, unmistakably, as the unseen continues to respond and the path continues to adjust, and the journey keeps unfolding step by step, moment by moment, as the ground listens and listens and listens, responding not to noise but to alignment. Not to effort, but to obedience, not to force, but to covenant, as the walk continues forward without pause, without announcement, without conclusion, still moving, still responding, still unfolding as the ground remains active beneath your feet. And the unseen continues to shift with every step you take, and the journey goes on and on and on, still in motion, still responding, still alive, still advancing, as the path stretches forward, and the ground keeps answering the authority carried by those who choose to walk in alignment. Even now, even here, even as the steps continue, and the response continues, and the movement deepens, and the story keeps unfolding without end. There are moments when obedience looks like weakness to the world, moments when following an instruction from God appears unnecessary, impractical, even foolish. And yet those moments are often the very gateways through which hidden authority is released. Because heaven does not measure power the way earth does. Earth looks for strength, visibility, strategy, and control, but God looks for surrender, alignment, and trust. And what appears foolish to the natural mind often carries authority in the unseen realm. Throughout history, God has chosen instructions that offended logic in order to expose pride and activate faith. Build an ark when there is no rain. Stretch out a staff over an impossible sea. March around fortified walls instead of attacking them. Speak to dry bones instead of burying them. None of these actions made sense in their moment. Yet each one unlocked a movement that human reasoning could never produce. The power was not in the action itself, but in the obedience behind it. Hidden authority is never loud. It does not announce itself. It does not demand recognition. It flows quietly through those who choose obedience over explanation. That is why the enemy fears small acts of faith more than public displays of religion. He knows that when someone obeys God in secret, something shifts in the unseen that cannot be easily reversed. What looks insignificant on the surface carries weight in the spiritual realm. There are instructions that bypass the intellect and go straight to the heart. They test whether you trust God enough to act without understanding. Because once you understand fully, faith is no longer required. And God is not looking for agreement. He is looking for surrender. Obedience says, I will move even if I cannot explain it. I will act even if I cannot defend it. I will follow even if I cannot predict the outcome. Foolish obedience strips away self-reliance. It removes the illusion of control. It forces the soul to lean not on strategy, but on trust. And in that place, authority is released. Not authority that dominates people, but authority that shifts atmospheres, authority that confronts resistance, authority that causes doors to open without being pushed. This kind of authority does not come from position. It comes from alignment. When David picked up smooth stones instead of armor, it was not ignorance. It was alignment. When the widow poured out her last oil, it was not recklessness. It was obedience. When Peter stepped out of the boat, it was not confidence in his ability. It was trust in a word. And in each case, heaven backed the action because obedience had already established authority before the result appeared. The world laughs at obedience it cannot explain, but heaven responds to it. Angels move at the sound of alignment. Resistance weakens when obedience enters a situation. Even delay begins to shift when someone acts according to instruction rather than fear. There are breakthroughs that do not respond to prayer alone, but to movement. Movement that feels risky, movement that feels exposed, movement that feels foolish. Hidden authority grows in private. It is forged in moments when no one is watching, when obedience costs reputation, comfort, or certainty. These are the moments that mark a person in the unseen. The enemy takes note, the ground responds, the atmosphere adjusts. Because obedience sends a signal that says this life is no longer governed by self-will but by surrender. There are things God will not release through talent, intelligence, or effort alone. They are reserved for obedience. And often the instruction is simple, because simplicity exposes motive. If the instruction were complex, pride could claim credit. But when it is simple, only obedience remains as the explanation. That is why Naaman almost missed his healing. That is why many stand on the edge of breakthrough, but refuse the instruction because it does not match their expectations. Foolish obedience unlocks doors that knowledge cannot open. It releases favor that strategy cannot manufacture. It creates movement that force cannot achieve. Because obedience aligns you with the will of God, and where His will is present, His authority follows. Not immediately always, not visibly always, but inevitably. There are seasons when God is less concerned with your outcome than with your alignment. Because once alignment is established, outcomes follow in their time. Obedience sets things in motion that continue long after the act itself is forgotten. A single obedient step can echo across years, opening paths you have not yet walked, preparing doors you have not yet seen. And this is the mystery. The more foolish the obedience appears to the world, the greater the authority it often releases in the unseen. Because it proves that God, not ego, is leading. It proves that trust has replaced control. It proves that surrender has taken the throne of the heart. And when that happens, resistance loses leverage, confusion loses power, and fear loses its voice. Hidden authority does not rush, it waits, it grows. It strengthens beneath the surface while everything looks unchanged above it. And then, suddenly, what once resisted begins to yield. What once delayed begins to move. What once opposed begins to weaken, not because you fought harder, but because obedience has been speaking all along, quietly, persistently, faithfully, releasing authority step by step, moment by moment, through actions that seemed small, choices that seemed strange, instructions that seemed foolish, yet were carrying weight far beyond what the natural eye could measure. As the unseen continues to respond, and alignment continues to deepen, and authority continues to rise, unfolding gradually, steadily, without announcement, without conclusion, as obedience keeps moving forward, and the effects continue to ripple outward, still unfolding, still advancing, still releasing what was hidden, still moving, still working, still shifting everything around it. As the journey continues, and the authority grows, and the alignment holds, and the movement remains active, pressing forward, deeper, further onward, without end, without closure, without a final word, as the process continues and obedience continues and the unseen continues to respond again and again, still moving, still releasing, still unfolding. There comes a moment when the natural world is touched by something it cannot explain, when an ordinary object, an ordinary action, an ordinary step becomes a trigger for an extraordinary movement, because God has always used the physical to awaken the spiritual, and what seems symbolic to man is often authoritative in the unseen realm. From the beginning, the Creator formed dust before breathing spirit, showing that the visible is not separate from the invisible, but designed to interact with it, to respond to it, to become a doorway through which heaven moves into earth. When the natural is touched in obedience, the spiritual begins to shift. A rod becomes power in a shepherd's hand. Water becomes a wall when feet step forward. Oil becomes overflow when poured out in faith. Bread becomes provision when broken. None of these things changed in substance, but they changed in assignment, because obedience redefines purpose. The moment an object is used according to divine instruction, it is no longer common. It becomes aligned. God does not ignore the physical world. He speaks through it. He marks moments with actions. He seals seasons with signs. Because humans live in the realm of touch and sight, God often meets them there first, using what they can hold to introduce what they cannot yet see. The spiritual realm responds not to effort, but to agreement, and agreement is often expressed through simple acts done in faith. This is why movements of God often begin quietly, without spectacle. A step taken, a word spoken, an object placed, a gesture made in obedience. The world sees nothing, but the unseen takes notice. Angels move at alignment, not at noise. Resistance weakens not when shouted at, but when authority is recognized. And authority is recognized when obedience is demonstrated in the natural realm. The enemy understands this pattern, which is why he works to keep obedience abstract, delayed, or intellectualized. Because once faith becomes action, the spiritual realm must respond. Once alignment becomes movement, the unseen can no longer remain neutral. Something begins to shift. Something begins to reposition. Something begins to move into place. There are moments when prayer alone is not the final key, not because prayer is weak, but because prayer was meant to lead to obedience. Faith that remains only internal does not fully activate the unseen. It is when faith steps into motion that the atmosphere begins to change. The natural becomes the signal. The action becomes the announcement. The obedience becomes the trigger. When salt is placed in shoes, when oil is poured, when hands are laid, when feet step forward, these are not rituals, they are points of contact. They are declarations that faith has moved from belief into action. And when that happens, the spiritual realm recognizes alignment and responds accordingly. What was waiting begins to move. What was restrained begins to loosen. What was delayed begins to accelerate. God often waits for the natural response before releasing the spiritual result, not because he is limited, but because partnership is required. Heaven moves where agreement exists, and agreement is not proven by intention, but by action. When the natural world is touched in obedience, it becomes a witness, a marker, a threshold moment that says something has shifted. This is why miracles often happen after movement, not before it. The sea did not part until the step was taken. The Jordan did not open until the feet entered. The walls did not fall until the march was completed. The spiritual waited for the natural to align. And once it did, the response was unstoppable. There are things waiting on the other side of an action you have not yet taken. Not because God is withholding, but because the moment has not yet been activated. The key has been given, but the door responds to turning, not possession. And turning requires movement. When the natural is touched in obedience, it sends a signal into the unseen that says alignment has occurred. That signal cannot be ignored. The atmosphere begins to adjust. The resistance begins to weaken. The timing begins to shift. And even if nothing appears to change immediately, something has already begun to move beneath the surface. Seeds break open underground long before anything is visible above the soil. Roots grow in darkness before fruit ever appears in the light. In the same way, the spiritual realm often begins to move long before the evidence reaches the surface. The action has already been recorded. The obedience has already been seen. The response has already been initiated. What you touch in faith does not remain the same. What you step into in obedience does not remain neutral. What you align with physically begins to realign spiritually. Because the two realms were never meant to be disconnected. They were designed to respond to one another. And so the move of God often begins not with thunder, but with touch. Not with spectacle, but with alignment. Not with force, but with faith expressed through action. The natural responds first, then the spiritual follows, and once the movement begins, it continues to unfold layer by layer, step by step, moment by moment, as alignment deepens and response increases, and what was once unseen begins to stir, and what was once still begins to move, and the process continues forward quietly, steadily, without announcement, without conclusion, as obedience keeps activating response, and the spiritual keeps unfolding, and the movement keeps advancing, still active, still alive, still in motion, as the unseen continues to respond to what was touched in faith, and the journey keeps unfolding without end.